So today I'm going to be sewing this swimwear bottom with these two angled rows of piping down the front. And if you've ever tried sewing piping on swimwear, then you know how frustrating and difficult it can be to sew perfectly even piping on swimwear. So today I'm going to be showing you my favorite method of getting that nice even piping every single time in my swimwear. Okay, so to start, my swimsuit bottom's front piece is cut in 3 separate pieces. So we have the center front and 2 side fronts. So the piping is going to go here and here. So you'll want to go ahead and cut your piping, and you want to make sure that the piping pieces you cut are long enough for the area that you're going to be inserting your piping into and 3/4 inch wide. So I have here my 2 3/4 inch wide piping strips. So one is going to go here and the other is going to go here. So I cut them 3/4 inch wide because I find that 3/4 inch gives you a nice 1/8 to 1/4 inch wide piping once it's sewn in with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So next we want to take one of our piping strips and fold it in half lengthwise with wrong sides together so that the right side of the piping is facing outwards. And for this fabric, it's not going to be easy to tell either way which side is the wrong side, but if you do have a piping that has a print on it, you want to make sure that the print is going to be facing out. And I'm just going to go ahead and pin this in half down the length of the piping. Alright, so I have my piping strip all pinned in half. So next what I'm going to do is pin my piping along the right side of one of these angled edges on my center front piece. And I'm going to be lining up all of the raw edges. So I'm making sure that the raw edge side of the piping piece is lining up with this raw edge here and pinning it in place. So I'm just going to go ahead and pin it there. I'm going to remove the pins I've already put in as I go and replace them to go through all the layers. Okay, so now my piping is pinned along the edge of this center front piece. And the reason I pin it first and then I replace the pins one by one as I pin it to this next piece is just because this swim fabric, especially such a narrow strip as this piping, is so hard to deal with if you don't keep it pinned. So I go ahead and pin it first and then I just replace each pin one by one. And then we're going to go ahead and do that again. So what we're going to do is actually fold or place this piece on top, right sides together, lining up this raw edge with the other raw edges underneath of it. So the raw edges of the piping as well as the raw edge of this center front piece. And once again, I'm going to remove these pins one by one and pin this place on top. So then we're going to have 4 layers basically, with the piping is going to be sandwiched in between these 2 pieces. So here we go, I've got now 4 layers, the piping sandwiched in between. So once it's sewn, this is what it's gonna look like. We're gonna have this beautiful piping peeking out. But now is the absolutely crucial part of how you make sure your piping is perfectly even. Because if you just go ahead and take this to your serger right now, things are gonna get real wonky as you try to put it through your serger. It's almost impossible to keep it even and keep all the edges lined up. So what I do is I actually take a hand sewing needle and thread and I just really quickly hand baste this edge and then take all the pins out. And I know hand sewing is horrible. I personally hate hand sewing and I avoid it at all costs, but for this specific application, I find that it is so worth it, because if you hand baste this in place, and it doesn't take that long, it doesn't have to be nice stitches, just really long, loose hand basting stitches, then your piping will be absolutely perfect every single time, and you have so much more control over where these edges are when you hand baste first. Okay, so I have here my needle threaded and I'm using black thread so that you can see it better, but like I said, this does not have to be pretty. This can be messy. We just want to baste it together long enough that we can get it through the serger without anything moving. So that's all basted in place, super fast, super easy. Now I can go ahead and trim away some of this excess. So now this is not going to move when we take it to the serger. So here's what it looks like if you fold it out. So this is what it's going to look like once we have everything sewn in place. So now I'm just going to go ahead and repeat that process for the other side. So folding this in half, pinning it along this edge, then pinning this over the top, sandwiching the piping in between, and quickly hand basting everything in place. So both my pipings are in and they are ready to go. So now I just need to take this to my serger, and I'm just going to serge here and here with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Alright, so my piping is serged in, and once you open it up, you have some beautiful, even piping. So now all you have to do is decide whether you want to press your piping towards the center or towards the outside based on which way you press your seam allowance. So you can see how when I turn the seam allowance to the inside, the piping goes to the outside, and when I turn it to the outside, the piping goes to the inside. Personally, I usually press the seam allowance towards the outside so that the piping is going towards the center. That's just how I like to do it, but it's totally up to you. So you want to go ahead and take this to your iron and press your piping so it stays nice and flat. And then you can go ahead and just put together your swimsuit as usual. My front lining I cut in one piece, so it's just going to be like so. So everything else goes together just like normal, and that is my favorite way of sewing piping so that everything stays nice and even and looks good. Well, I hope that you enjoyed that video, and next up, if you want to learn about how to sew swimwear binding, I have a tutorial for you up here somewhere. So I'll see you over there.